When I was 15, I was dating a guy who was 19. It was one of those things that just kind of happened. My best friend was dating his best friend, and pretty soon he was telling everyone I was his girlfriend. I wasn't really attracted to him. He was just kind of gangly and plain, but he had a car, access to alcohol, and he was generous with the paychecks he got from his job as a security guard. Of course, all that came with a price, and as anyone who's ever dated a 19-year-old knows, he was forever pressuring me to go all the way. On this particular night, we were at a retro arcade a few miles from my mom's place. It was almost 11 and I was already pretty buzzed. My mom worked as a bartender, so it was easy to sneak out as long as I got home before 2. I was texting her a mundane request about toothpaste, so she'd think I was at home getting ready for bed, when my quote-unquote boyfriend pounced. Hands swarming my body, sloppy kisses on my neck. I pushed him off and chastised him about making a scene. And then the nightly pressure to go back to his place and surrender my V-card began. He was particularly determined that night. It started with the usual gauntlet of promises, to make it special, that he'd respect me afterward, etc., etc. When that didn't work, he escalated by threatening to leave me at the arcade to go play Madden with his buddy. I snapped. I told him, in more vulgar terms, that he could F off and perish. He left. As a freshly single woman, I had a new problem. The arcade was closing, and I didn't have a ride home. I couldn't set up an Uber account because I didn't have a credit card, and being 15, none of my friends were old enough to drive. I had two options. I could either call my mom, admit I was drinking and out past curfew, or I was hoofing it home. As I headed to the exit, I noticed a man who seemed to be watching me. When I left, he left as well. It didn't feel like a big deal in the moment because the arcade was closing, but that was a mistake. I put in my earbuds and started walking. The main road I was walking along was well lit and still had a decent amount of traffic coming and going between the stoplights. As I walked, I was startled by a random driver who honked at me as he drove by. As I looked back, I noticed someone was behind me. A few minutes later, I glanced back again, and sure enough, that man from the arcade was following me. Head down, hands in his pockets, nonchalant. I cut through a strip mall to alter my path. The man followed. At this point, I was getting sketched out. I'm 5'3" and 115 pounds. The man following me looked to be in his late 30s or 40s. Medium height, medium build, probably close to 200 pounds. He looked like someone who had a job, like someone you'd expect to have a car, not someone walking the streets close to midnight on a workday. I decided to test whether he was following me by going inside a restaurant in the plaza. As I walked in, I was relieved to see it was decently packed with average-looking people. I headed to an empty booth next to a window on the far side of the restaurant and took a seat. The waiter brought me a glass of water and a menu, which I pretended to read as I slyly watched the man continue walking past the restaurant and into the night. I felt a hint of embarrassment and a heap of relief. It was just a coincidence after all. I collected myself for a few minutes and then left the restaurant to resume my journey. I left the strip mall and turned onto another smaller street. This one wasn't nearly as busy as the last one, but still decently lit with streetlights. I walked along the street for a few minutes and then started getting that unmistakable feeling of dread that I was being watched. I didn't want to look back and reveal my suspicion, so I paused the podcast I was listening to and turned on the front camera of my iPhone. I angled the camera behind me and looked at the screen. Following at a distance was the man from the arcade. There was a convenience store nearby, and I took off running in that direction. As I entered the parking lot, an old-fashioned muscle car pulled up in front of me. The windows were down and the driver leaned over. He explained that it looked like someone might be following me. I nodded and told him I thought so too. The man offered to give me a ride. I glanced back and saw the guy from the arcade still watching me. I opened the door to get in and noticed a purse in the back seat. The strap was torn, like it had been ripped off of someone. I changed my mind and went into the convenience store instead. The muscle car drove off and the man following me continued down the street and out of sight. I bit the bullet and texted my mom to let her know my situation, and then I waited. My mom picked me up a little after 2 a.m. I knew I was in deep trouble, but at that moment, I was just happy to be safe. My mom went to Taco Bell to grab some dinner, and on the way back, something caught my eye. Parked at that convenience store was the muscle car that offered me a ride. Leaning against it, drinking beers together, was both the driver and the guy who followed me from the arcade. I ducked down as we waited for the light. In that moment, I realized that those two were working together to lure me into that car. If it wasn't for that broken purse, my life would have likely taken a turn so awful I can't even fathom it. I never snuck out again. Welcome back to the Dark Echo Studio. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Little piece of trivia, that car we used is my old 1969 Mercury Marauder. I'm hoping that someday that car meets its end in a fiery crash on a film set. But until then, go ahead and hit the bell icon, turn on notifications. I know our release schedule can be pretty haphazard, and we'd hate to have you miss any of the true horror goodness we have coming your way. Remember, you're never alone, even when you think you are.